I remember a deal my mother made with my brothers and I when we were in high school. The deal was this: if we ever found ourselves in a situation in which we recognized that the wise thing to do was to simply walk away from it, we could always call her any time of day or night, and she would come get us. Up to a point, of course, no questions asked. I know of at least one time when one of my brothers took her up on it. He was the one of us who was more social. He always had a lot of friends and girlfriends. While I was always the shy kid who'd stay home and watch TV, he was the one who usually went and hung out with others on Friday and Saturday nights. Late on one of these nights, when he was in high school, he called Mom from where he was and asked her to please come and get him. He even asked that she not go directly to the house from where he was calling, but instead to go to a corner down a nearby street. He would slip out from where he was and meet her there. Wasting no time, Mom got into the car and drove right over to where he asked her to pick him up. He got right in, and they went home. To this day, my mom doesn't know the circumstances in which he'd been. She respected his choice not to discuss it. What mattered more was that my brother was wise enough to know exactly when it was time to leave. Mom's no questions asked policy was her way of showing us, in hanging out with friends, that she trusted us enough to do the right thing. By the time we were in high school, both she and my dad were willing to a point to hacer la vista gorda, or to look the other way. To them, what was really more important was that we not let ourselves end up in really serious trouble as a result of not having gone to them earlier on for fear of a lecture over potential faults afterward as to what we might have done in order to steer clear of the situation in the first place. In a way sort of similar to how my mom was available to do this for us, I'd like to look at a passage from chapter 1 of James, which describes something with which God is always available. In chapter 1, verse 5 of James, the text says this: "But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him." In other words, to want wisdom is to wish well without waste. Wisdom. In the original Hebrew, the term used is defined as skill in living. It pertains to understanding, or possibly being clever, shrewd, or streetwise. Being able to more correctly discern right from wrong, knowing the right thing to do under the circumstances, all things considered, having been around the block a few times and having seen the original territory on which you're standing. If knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are a fruit, then wisdom is understanding why we do not put them in fruit salad. Asking God for wisdom in prayer. What are the alternative options? As it says in Proverbs 3:5, leaning on your own understanding. And then as it says in Romans 12:16, being wise in your own estimation. What might be risky about these latter options? Sometimes when we have done so, we may not realize the potential folly of it. That is until the critical moment, perhaps after the fact, when it may be a bit late. Right when we should have sought wisdom and exercised it. And now, here we are, perhaps with the consequences to be faced as a result. Consequences may be or may be not in the form of harm, but more so at least in some form of inconvenience or embarrassment to either ourselves or someone else. Let's say that you're buying a car and you want to have the car's engine examined by a mechanic. Should the recommendation you follow for a good mechanic necessarily be from that salesman down at Honest John's Used Cars? Is that kind of wisdom necessarily from a very reliable source? Why not? But consider God. He is a God of love. He always desires the very best of what is good for you and me. If we ask him for wisdom, would it really be consistent with his character that he would give it to us for more his own gain than our benefit? No. He has it to give generously, no strings attached. We must remember, in terms of what wisdom is as one of his attributes, by virtue that he always acts with full knowledge and correct values. Back to the car salesman. Why is it really a buyer beware type deal at certain kinds of car lots? For instance, that endless row of used car dealers along Southeast 82nd in Portland, where I used to live. One time I bought a used Nissan from one of those places. My previous car had recently been totaled in an accident. I was feeling under pressure to get the car I'd borrowed back to whom I'd borrowed it from. So I went shopping on Southeast 82nd and bit the bait after listening to the typical underhanded spiel for which car salesmen are well known. You're getting a great car. Well, I'd take this one for myself if I didn't already have a Mercedes. Then, though I actually did take it to a mechanic of my own choosing, I did not seek out a clear explanation in layman's terms as to the lowdown on work of which the car was in need, nor of the price I could expect to pay for it all. I acted wise in my own estimation. I went ahead and bought the Nissan. The car turned out to be a real carcacha, or lemon. The previous owners had really not taken care of it at all. They hadn't even regularly changed the oil. In the little over 4 months I had the car, I ended up putting an additional $2,000 into it, so to fix an endless parade of problems that kept coming up. Being the poor seminary student I was at the time, this wasn't exactly cash I readily had on hand. I had leaned on my own understanding rather than seeking God's wisdom, especially so in terms of not finding someone who knew cars much better than I did, who could have offered more realistic advice. Had I done so, it probably would have spared me from a lot. Since then, I have learned to take my time and be a bit more cautious in shopping for cars, and most importantly, to seek wisdom from someone more knowledgeable about them. To want wisdom is to wish well without waste. Teacher, it's been one of those days when you've already dealt with a lot, and then a student asks you a question that you're sincerely astonished to hear, because it's about something so fundamental that you'd have thought they'd have had it down a long time ago. At least they should have, as far as you're concerned. Furthermore, it's supposedly one of those things that, as you see it, is quite easy to figure out with a little bit of common sense. What wisdom will you quietly take a second to seek before you choose your tone of voice and body language as you answer? Or it's time to sit down and plan a lesson. The amount of time with which you have to work is already not quite ideal. But then the phone rings. It's a friend or family member. And their reason for calling is because they need your help with something. Perhaps it's something quick and trivial. Perhaps it's more complicated and urgent. But from what they tell you on the phone, it really isn't clear. Why is it good to take a moment to seek wisdom in how to respond before you do? Or you have a colleague who is really passionate about this one technique that has worked well for them in their classroom. They are enthusiastically outspoken as they post about it on the language teaching forum online. And yet, not only is this technique not really a fit for the context of your classroom, but this particular colleague also just happens to have one of those personalities which you just can't stand. There are ways that they say things that are rather annoying to you. Before you click to post your 2 cents worth in response, why does it matter so much to seek wisdom in taking that extra moment to read through one more time what you're fixing to say, just to be sure that you've worded it appropriately, especially because once you've made that click, there's no taking it back. Under these particular circumstances, or perhaps circumstances comparable, what's the sensible course of action to take? And why could taking that extra moment to ask God in prayer for wisdom make a key difference in so determining? In bringing this meditation to a close, I want to touch on a little bit of practical criteria in asking God for wisdom. At school, in class, at home, in life, wherever, whenever, etc., and so forth. Interrogative pronouns, our old friends from circling, are always good in critically looking a problem over and asking for wisdom in how to deal with it, especially when you pair them together with the adverb exactly, as in when exactly, where exactly, why exactly, who exactly, and how exactly. Anytime, under any circumstances in which you find yourself uncertain of the appropriate step to take in response to the situation, you can always look to God for wisdom, for help in seeing exactly what to do. It may come in the form of just one step for the moment, and then you ask Him again right after for the next step, or more immediately seeing clearly the complete course of action to take in order to address the situation you're facing. The point is that God can't always be counted on for wisdom, because He is good, because He gives it generously without finding fault. Whether it's like my mom coming to get us, whether it's used cars and other risky investments, whether it's day-to-day professional matters for us as world language teachers, it is never too late to ask him for wisdom. Even if we weren't necessarily asking for it as we started out. Ultimately speaking, you'll never be sorry. That's how willing God is to give when it comes to wisdom. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Remember, to want wisdom is to wish well without